experienced mental injury or trauma from suffering through PowerPoint karaoke.
When they hurt me, I knew who to call. I knew who would help me, and I knew who I could trust.
I don't even need to see y'all to know that every single one of you just raised your hand. What is it about PowerPoint that makes speakers think that they need to read every last flippin' word on the screen? And why is it so torturous for us as audience members? What even makes a good visual aid? That is what we're here for. In this video, we're looking at what makes a visual aid and what they most certainly are not. What visual aids work well and how to design them for the biggest possible impact. Let's start with some definitions. At first glance, it might seem easy to define what a visual aid is. Visual means of or pertaining to the sense of sight, and to aid is to give assistance or add emphasis. Well, that's the theory. But if it's true, then why is death by PowerPoint a thing? I've seen it. I've survived it. I am a survivor. Great visual aids work with a speaker. They enhance the message and leave a lasting impact on an audience.
Enhance. Enhance.
Problem is, a lot of speakers, especially with PowerPoint, put every last detail onto the screen as a form of speaking notes. Then, as they naturally feel their confidence levels dropping, they resort to reading every last detail off the screen. Visual aids are for the benefit of the listeners, not the speaker. So when we're designing visual aids, we need to keep that in mind. So what can we use as visual aids? That all depends on what you want the visual to accomplish. If you want to give your audience the impression that you're an amateur who still loves making collages on poster boards, then by all means, go that route. Actually, no. Don't. Let's begin our conversation by looking at the difference between active and passive visual aids. A passive visual is one that just sort of sits there, doing nothing. Sometimes, a passive visual is nothing more than eye candy. Like if I'm talking about the city of Dubrovnik, where they filmed Game of Thrones, and I have a picture on the screen behind me of the city walls. Active visuals, on the other hand, are visual aids that we actually interact with and use during the presentation. And I'm not just talking about physical objects here either. A speaker who puts a picture up on a PowerPoint and then walks the audience through every element of that image is using PowerPoint as an active visual. For the most part, I recommend that about 75% or more of the visuals you use are active visuals. Sure, it's okay if sometimes you use passive visuals to set the scene or create a mood, but for the most part, your visual aids should be actively working with you throughout your presentation. Okay, let's talk about specific types of visuals for a bit. If you're using statistical information to make a point, then consider using graphs and charts, but know what each type is for. A pie chart shows proportions among items. A line graph shows trends over time, and a bar graph shows relationships among items. Physical objects are a fantastic visual, but be careful. First of all, you want to make sure your audience can actually see the item. Don't pass it around the room because once somebody gets it in their hands and it's sitting in front of them, they're immediately distracted. Either that or someone could drop it and break it. You could also physically walk around smaller items so that the audience can see them in front of their faces, and then show that object on the projector so that everyone can see it in more detail. To date, one of the best physical objects I've ever seen a student use was a student who rolled in an entire engine on a rolling engine stand and then used that to show the audience how an engine works. Think about it. He had to wheel an entire 500-pound engine across the parking lot, through the building, up the elevator, and into the classroom. Obviously, it left an impact if I'm talking about it all these years later. A lot of students like to use video or audio clips. And with YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, etc., it's so easy to do. The only drawback here is that you have to make absolutely sure everything works. If you're using video or audio clips, please test everything in advance and have a backup plan for if something fails. Also, when using video or audio clips, it's a good idea to generally keep them under about 10% of the total time you've been allowed. So if you have a 10-minute speech and you have 3 video clips to show, make sure their combined total doesn't exceed 1 minute. Any more than that, and you're letting the video do the work for you. Remember, a visual aid is there to help a speaker, not to replace you. Sometimes you may want to leave the audience with something to take away from the speech. Maybe you're doing a speech on the science behind the perfect chocolate chip cookie, and you want to give them recipes to take home. That's a fantastic idea, but as with physical objects, maybe wait until after the speech is over to hand those out. If I get something in front of me, I'm going to read it and get distracted. Another visual aid that works great is you. Remember back when we were talking about how to dress for a speech? Sometimes your appearance acts as a visual aid. Maybe your speech is how not to act like the stereotypical tourist and you come in dressed as one. But then, at the conclusion of each main point, you slowly start to take off those touristy items, and underneath, you've got regular clothes on. Remember, get creative here. Lastly, let's talk about the most obvious form of visual aid, and that is PowerPoint. Since I've already mentioned the dangers of overusing PowerPoint, I won't go through that again. But let's talk strategy and tips here. First of all, make it big. Fill the screen space you have and avoid leaving any negative space behind. Make sure everyone in the room can clearly see it. Second, keep it simple. Avoid using clip art, funky transitions, and ridiculous sound effects. Not to mention overly obnoxious backgrounds, themes, or frilly fonts. One of the most common mistakes beginning speakers make is assuming that more is more, but it's not. In this case, simpler is far better. To ensure simplicity, let's use what's called the 5x7 rule. No more than 5 lines of text up and down, no more than 7 words across. Any more than this and you're trying to say too much with one slide. Trust me, when there's excessive text on a slide, the audience is reading and no longer listening to you. Third, think about colors. Generally speaking, try to use a darker background with a lighter text. Bright backgrounds can be blinding, but at the same time, make sure that your text contrasts effectively with the background so the audience can see it. Fourth, keep your message consistent with whatever you're saying at that moment. If the image or the text on the screen behind you doesn't match what you're saying, then it's like having someone behind you shouting at the audience while you try to speak. Fifth, when it comes to potentially graphic, disturbing, or shocking images or videos, make sure you warn the audience in advance. You know, every time a student asks me if they can give a speech on STDs, I just cringe.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
I have seen more genital warts in class than most college nurses see in an entire school year. The student clicks to the next slide, and whoa, okay, there it is. Yep, not forgetting that anytime soon. This is the stuff of my nightmares. Warning the audience in advance ensures that the shock doesn't cause them to look away or to stop listening as soon as they see it. There's nothing necessarily wrong with using shock value, but only use it as much as you need to make your point. Then, remove the image or video and move on. Don't leave it up there for everyone to get distracted. Also, when it comes to choosing images, please choose the highest resolution possible. If you choose something smaller and you go to enlarge the image to fill up that negative space, you may find that it gets all pixelated. That makes your presentation look like an amateur built it. You want your images to be crisp and pop off the screen. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about timing. As you write up your note cards, you may want to use highlighters or draw little symbols somewhere that remind you when it's time to advance to the next slide. All too often in the heat of anxiety, it's really easy to forget that you have visuals going on behind you and to click to the next one at the right moment. As you practice at home, be sure that you're practicing advancing the slides so that you help develop that muscle memory. Most modern wireless clickers have a button on them that you can press that makes the screen go dark so that you can walk around in the front of the room without getting blinded by the obnoxious projector light. If you don't have a clicker and you just have the computer, then in PowerPoint, all you have to do is press the B key and it mutes the screen. Or you could insert a blank slide, change the background to black, and it effectively accomplishes the same thing. I know this is a lot to take in, so let's take a look at some of the most important things to remember from this video. First, get creative and have fun with your visual aids. Done right, they add richness and a memorable impact to your message. Second, as with the speech itself, practice using them. Third, think critically about choice, design, and use of your visual aids to ensure they're getting the biggest impact possible. And fourth, if you're using technology, be sure to test it out in advance and have a backup plan for when things go wrong. A speaker who can adapt quickly to failures or missteps demonstrates confidence and preparedness to an audience, which in turn earns respect and admiration. More than that, it keeps people listening. See you next time.